A very warm welcome to the Disaster Resilience webinar. Um, Disasters are often described as natural, but the impacts are rarely natural. They are shaped by how we assess risk, how we align policy with evidence, and implement decisions on the ground. So, I think right after tsunami, on several decades, some of my own work in disaster risk management and the infrastructure resilience has consistently framed disasters through three interconnected phases: pre disaster, during the disaster, and post disaster. While each phase demands attention, we have strongly emphasized the pre disaster phase because this is where sound engineering, informed policy, scientific assessment, land use planning, and early warning systems can significantly reduce both the probability of occurrence and the scale of impact. Given evidence, including frameworks for disaster risk reduction, clearly demonstrates that investments in preparedness and prevention deliver far greater social and economic returns than reactive interventions after a disaster has already occurred. Yet in practice, unfortunately, we often see a disproportionate focus on post-disaster activities where attention, funding, and visibility tend to surge only after the loss and damage has already taken place. So many players want to jump into that one. I'll give an example from Canada. We recently had a hail damage during the summertime. And I met this guy who's in a business and say, we love the hail damage because his business is going to increase it. But that's the mentality of some of them. So let me be clear. Post-disaster response and recovery are absolutely essential. And they must be carried out ethically, transparently, and effectively. However, as professionals, policymakers, academics, scholars, we must be willing to critically reflect on a systematic imbalance where prevention, preparedness, and risk-informed planning receives far less priority than emergency response and reconstruction. But today, risk is increasingly predictable through hazard maps, climate models, engineering analysis, yet outcomes remain very uncertain. This suggests that our challenge is no longer purely technical. So disaster resilience is a systems challenge involving engineering, governance, finance, institutions, communities. So this is the lens through which we will frame today's discussion. We are privileged through the introductions to be joined by three internationally recognized scholars. And I also love to see that, Canadian, I'm representing Canada. We have representation from Australia, UK, and Sri Lanka. So that the work that spans in engineering resilience, policy integration, community-centered disaster management. So I'll go the discussion through the three rounds, depending on the time. And my first round, I want to focus on risk assessment, the foundation upon which resilience strategies are built. So I'll put a core question to everybody, but I'll have some tailored prompts for each one of them. So the first round, let's talk about how effectively do current risk assessment approaches capture real-world vulnerabilities, and where do they fall short when decisions must actually be made. So with that, let's go to the local level at Sri Lanka with Professor Dissanayake. Now, from your experience in Sri Lanka, particularly following the 2004 tsunami, how effective have large-scale assessments of damage and existing buildings and bridges been in informing long-term risk reduction and retrofitting strategies? Where do you still see gaps between assessment and action?
Janaka, thank you for the introduction and the first question. And my involvement go to the disaster after the tsunami 2004. So as soon as disaster happened, many organizations in Sri Lanka, including the Society of Structural Engineering, we have been developing the guideline to implement in the mainly post-disaster construction as well as new construction. What happened is that at the beginning we see that this guideline has been implemented, but later we found that these are just became the guideline and the books or something like that, not the practically implemented. What the reason behind this one is that there is no proper organization set to do the undertaking and the enforcement. So that has been the case many situations. Therefore, I think we must go to the level of implementation. This is where I believe that the introduction of the building codes is important for Sri Lanka. I don't see that the building code will prevent the disaster, but at least we must make sure that the proper strengthening, proper material and use, it become a law then. So then every construction must follow the code of practices given in the building code. This is where I see that, because after some time of this disaster, also if we do not implement the proper procedure, we don't see that has been implemented in the ground. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. You raised an interesting, because I saw several YouTube videos where the buildings collapse, right? The question is, as you said, have they gone through the right process? Have they gone through the right code, right? Are there any really gaps in there that needs to have that proper accountability and the governance on that? So thank you very much, Ranjith. So my good friend, Professor Priyan Mendis, from engineering, right? We have very sophisticated modeling tools, right? Are these tools helping decision makers manage uncertainty, or are they sometimes creating a false sense of precision?
Thank you
very
much.
Good question for an engineer.
Yeah, that's actually very good question, Prof. Janaka. Thank you for asking that question. Also, first of all, let's thank the GAP headquarters under the direction of Professor Ranjith for organizing this very important webinar and the topic. So I'll be very brief, because I think the modeling is somewhere which I have been involved for a long time, and going through very briefly, I'll answer this one. But in Australia, I've gone through where we did a lot of modeling for the bushfires. Every year it happens in Melbourne, the bushfires. We also have gone through other events, the earthquakes to cyclones to many other events. So modeling has been there. So I'll look at both sides. I think we need to look at the both sides of the argument. That is, modeling is very important for decision makers. Why not modeling? And AI has added another equation now. It's a totally different game now with AI coming in. However, we'll be very careful. There are very sophisticated models. We all have gone through, 4 of us who had PhD students also been involved in modeling, and so it's really a long way now from those days. However, we have powerful computers, we have everything, a lot of things can be modeled, so which we can give the answers, simple answers to the decision makers. So the other thing what modeling happens is that we can look at different scenarios. We just can have thousands of scenarios. If this happens, what happens, the consequences, and that sort of thing. So, and then we can have our engineering solutions. But however, the problem is that what we input also, the models that where we, this garbage in, garbage out theories are there where, like if we don't get the input properly, if the assumptions are wrong, we can get totally wrong answers. So as us engineers, we give it to the decision makers some of these answers. So it has to be carefully done, and a lot of checking has to be done. But also we have to be really. Maybe I'll just stop there. But I think I can talk a lot about some of this modeling. But we have to be carefully do that modeling. Yes, models are there. Why not? We have to use it. But at the same time, we have to be careful to use it.
Yeah. Thank you, Priyan. Basically, risk models, simulation models may be technically robust and totally, but decisions often demand clarity rather than complexity, right? And also the communication. So now we go to UK. My very good friend again, Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga. Great to see you. Now, risk assessments are often technical in nature, right? But how well do they integrate social vulnerability, equity, and community resilience, particularly in ways that inform policy?
Thank you very much, Janaka. Once again, I'm just so glad to be part of this webinar, which is actually quite an important, and timing cannot be underestimated as well. So, for example, I think Professor Priyan Mendis highlighted while the technical risk assessments excel at modeling physical hazards, as he highlighted, for example, like flood zones or structural failures. They, in my opinion, Janaka, they actually historically struggle to integrate social vulnerability, equity, and community resilience. I think you identified that point very well. But having said that, when these social factors are missing, in my view, policy decisions often default to efficiency over fairness, leading to outcomes that protect the wealthy while leaving marginalized communities to bounce back on their own. I think it is a strong statement to make, but I will actually go with that. So in that sense, I think what is this disconnect between technical and social data? For example, to me, the primary challenge is that technical risk is often quantitative, for example, probabilistic in models, while social vulnerability, in my view, is qualitative rather than relational, for example. So we need to actually do a kind of a mapping exercise between technical risk approach and the social and equity gaps. What are they? I'll actually try to, of course, I have done quite a lot of work in mapping these two areas, but I will highlight some key points. Technical risk approach is actually quite often exposure based. For example, maps actually physical proximity to a hazard. They actually identify physical proximity to a hazard. For example, houses in a floodplain. And also technical risk approaches are most of the times are asset focused. They actually prioritize protection based on property value or replacement cost, as we all know. And also technical risk approach is most of the times based on historical data. That means they rely on past disaster performance to predict future needs. That is what the models do. On the other hand, when we actually take the social and equity gaps, social and equity areas are actually, sadly, sensitivities often ignored, because I say they do not account for who lives there. For example, it could be elderly or low-income renters. And also, most of the times, they are kind of wealth bias. Policies favor protecting high-value assets, which can lead to climate gentrification and disinvestment in poor areas. And also, finally, the legacy of inequity. It actually ignores how past policies, for example, like redlining, created the very vulnerabilities being measured today. So, what are the kind of the status quo in terms of emerging tools for policy integration between technical and social aspects? To bring this gap, in my view, policymakers are increasingly using tools which layer demographic data on top of hazard maps to highlight where the human risk is highest. I think that is very, very important. For example, researchers use multivariate indices, for example, in isolating factors such as poverty, disability, and vehicle access. And also research suggests these social factors can double the actual harm felt from a physical hazard. I think that is actually, again, a very, very important point. So just to conclude this short intervention, where policy still falls short, what are the key gaps? For example, the first one that I want to highlight is the benefits cost analysis trap. I think, again, I'm barking at the wrong tree here. Particularly, you have done quite a lot of work in cost benefit analysis. But having said that, as an example, if 1 million seawall protects a 10 million mansion, then the maths works. If it protects a 200,000 community center, sadly, it often doesn't. Yeah. And also, there's a problem in mainstreaming. Social equity is often treated as a sidebar or a special chapter rather than a core metric that can weight over a project. Sadly, that is the situation. And also, finally, the data lag. Census data is often 5 to 10 years old, as we all know. In rapidly changing urban environments like what we are facing today, a vulnerable neighborhood might have already been displaced or transformed by the time the policy is enacted, so that 10-year, 5-year period is actually will become no use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dilanthi. I think, when you talk about these things, certainly we already see a gap between the risk knowledge and the decision usability, which I think is a theme that we can talk about throughout our discussion. And thank you for talking about various other gaps that based on your experience. So let's go to round two, where let's talk about the policy alignment in terms of why risk knowledge struggles to shape policy, right? Look at any country, any country that they have a disaster risk reduction strategies and policies. Yet the alignment between risk evidence and policy action remains inconsistent. So my core question to all of you, where I'll put some tailored prompts to each one of you: why does strong risk evidence so often fail to meaningfully influence policy, regulation, and long-term planning? And with that, Dilanthi, let me give you a tailored prompt from the great work that you have done, in terms of your policy work, right? What institutional or governance barriers most commonly prevent risk evidence from being translated into effective disaster policy?
Thanks very much, Janaka. But again, I think this area of governance is extremely important. And I was very pleased to say I actually headed a UNDRR task force on governance a few years ago. For example, when risk evidence fails to translate into effective disaster policy, the breakdown usually occurs within the institutional architecture of the government. I think we have seen that in the past, and we have seen that in the very recent past as well. And I'm sure we will see that in the future too. These barriers are not just about bad data. To me, they are structural traps built into how modern bureaucracies function. So from the governance perspective, I actually see four most common barriers. Of course, there are quite a few, but bearing in mind the time that is available to us, I just want to highlight the key points. The first point that I want to highlight as a barrier is the fragmentation of accountability, for example, or on the other hand, the siloed governance. Disaster risk is systematic, as we all know, but sadly, governance is sectorial. Yes, so the barrier is that most governments assign risk ownership to specific lead departments. For example, Environment Department of Floods, Health for pandemics, and so on and so forth. However, a major flood is also an infrastructure, education, and economic crisis. Again, I think we have seen that during the last several weeks. So the result of this is when evidence suggests a cross-cutting solution, such as changing land use laws to prevent flooding, the lead agency often lacks the authority to mandate changes in other departments, such as housing or commerce, and this results in policy muddle where agencies have overlapping or conflicting mandates. I think we have actually seen this to our own eyes. And the second barrier that I see for governance is the decentralization gap. Many countries, of course, including Sri Lanka, have national disaster strategies, but rely on local government for implementation. So the barrier is actually the local authorities often have the most on the ground risk evidence, but the least amount of fiscal and technical capacity or the power or the responsibility. So the result of that is that the national policies become unfunded mandates. A city might know it is a risk for a landslide, for example, as evidence, but without the budget for enforcement or engineering, the evidence remains a self-document, while development continues in high-risk zones. We have seen that for our own eyes in Sri Lanka. The third barrier that I want to highlight is the disincentives for anticipatory spending. You highlighted that, Janaka, at the very beginning, the importance of the preparedness. So this is actually very much linked to that. Institutional budget cycles are designed for the short term, which creates a prevention paradox, in my view. The barrier there is it is easier to get funding for reactive relief. We have seen that again and again, which is visible, popular, and urgent, than the proactive mitigation, which is actually invisible and long term. So the result is governments often find themselves in this vicious cycle where they spend about 90% of their disaster budgets on recovery. Sometimes it could even be more. Leaving only 10%, it could even be less, for the mitigation that would have prevented the loss in the first instance. So my final barrier from the governance perspective is the punctuated equilibrium or the policy windows in simple terms. So the governance actually moves in leaps, not as a steady crawl. The barrier is that evidence often matures during quiet times when political interest is low, as we all know. By the time a policy window opens, for example, usually immediately after a disaster, that's exactly what we are doing, which I must say that we really need to support. The pressure to return to normal is so high that decision makers often bypass complex evidence in favor of fast, visible repairs. That is something that we really need to avoid in this governance perspective. So the result is we big bet the same because the institutional pressure for speed overrides the evidence-based need for structural change. So these are the 4 governance barriers that I want to highlight. Just to summarize, the fragmentation of accountability, the decentralization gap relating to local governments, and also disincentives for anticipation spending, again, lack of preparedness spending. And the final one is actually the punctuated equilibrium of policy windows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dilanthi, for highlighting those 4 areas in the governance. I think this also underscores that the policy failure is often a systems issue there rather than a knowledge gap. So, Priyan, we talk about the challenges with the modeling. So let me now ask the question about engineering standards and building codes, which Professor Dissanayake mentioned earlier, evolve slowly. So how do we reconcile this with rapidly changing risk profiles driven by the climate change?
It's a very, very good question, because there's no doubt climate change has really, due to climate change, the disasters have increased, the intensities have increased. So there are so many examples around the world. People can argue against, but it happens. And we are all the time we are saying, breaking records now. Temperature, the maximum temperature, we say this is the maximum temperature ever, like that. So I can give a few examples. Now, you put a nice word, the codes and standards, because I think that's the one regulate a lot of things. Now, one side being, I had to give one example, being involved with the Australian Earthquake Code Committee for a long time now. But at that time, I was not in the committee at that time, but I joined afterwards. But 1989, there was an earthquake in Australia, Newcastle earthquake. It was a 0 zone before. Now, the earthquake happened and killed 13 people now. So it's a large number relatively for a country like Australia. We think we don't have many earthquakes. Now, So that's one example. So we had to really change the code and to have to bring Newcastle to the highest range. So these are the kind of difficulties that the so codes won't cover everything. Now, again, I'll be very brief now. I can again talk for hours and all this topic, but so codes are necessary. Codes are normally written conservative because of the other legal issues as well. Like, as code writers, we had to be careful because there could be some legal issues and people are using in codes and all that. The clauses we put in the codes and standards. Now, they are necessary. And however, other thing that in disasters, the problem is it can be site specific. It can be even in a one particular country, there are certain, if you write the standard, one standard, Sri Lanka is a smaller country, but still we have something which is applicable to one end in the western side may not be applicable to the eastern side. So these ones can be site specific. So having written general code clauses. So I'm talking about the difficulties of writing. Codes are essential, standards are essential. It's like we had to use that as a prescriptive methods, and that is the guidelines people use. But other side is that it can be site specific. So briefly, what I'm trying to say is we have to really move into a bit more on the performance-based approaches, where we are prescriptive-based previous codes and standards. Now we have to move into the performance-based. Some of the standards are, again, I can explain if there are time later on, but the performance-based standards had to be done. Depends on the what you require the performance. What sort of performance? We can't build fortresses, and you need to look at the cost and side as well. And I think Prof. Dilanthi also mentioned this, but the cost-wise, the cost also things. But we have to really looking at all that and then balance it there. My main, in summary, my main message is codes are essential, necessary, but however, really have to have some knowledge. You can't just open a code and just use the clauses or something in the standards, but you need to be really understand, and then even if possible do some extended work on modeling or probabilistic methods and all that. So you need to maintain a balance. So good understanding, everything, good deep understanding, fundamentals are required, not just looking at the code and trying to use it. I hope I answered that question.
Thanks, Priyan. I mean, there's a bit of a lag also in policy, and standards can itself become a source of risk, right? So I'm going to pass this one to now Professor Dissanayake, Ranjith. So, I mean, you have been involved in national level research on potential future earthquake scenarios, right, over the years. From that work, how well prepared do you think Sri Lanka is today? Right? I mean, we have seen really bad examples in the recent disaster. So particularly in translating scenario-based research into enforceable policy and design requirements.
Yeah, Professor Janaka, very good question. And we, with the help of the Disaster Mitigation Management Center, we conducted the research program in Sri Lanka, led by the late Professor Nimal Senaviratne, where we understand that considering the possibility of having a potential earthquake in Sri Lanka, with the data from the starting 1916 onward, maybe we can predict another earthquake in Sri Lanka time to come. So that what we have to do, situation like that, we have to understand of course the future building must be designed considering the potential earthquake, as well as existing structures must, as well as including the building and bridges and so forth, must be evaluated and strengthened for the pace for the future earthquake. So of course, now we understand, but the questions come. Of course, new high-rise building and so forth designed for the potential earthquake. But in order to strengthen the existing structures, we need the investment. So I have a experience in Japan where I did my master and PhD, but they have well prepared because they have many disasters. They have earthquake, tsunami, you name landslide as well. So they have identified the potential location and strength against the landslide, and they have investigated most of the building, and either they retrofit or otherwise they demolish. If they think that retrofitting is expensive, they demolish it. But they spend a huge investment on that one. But a country like Sri Lanka, though we have identified, they have documented, the investment is huge. That become a big question. For example, I'm traveling Kandy and Colombo. You might see the area where strength by the NBRO very recently, about maybe half a kilometer. There is no disaster. That is the area they have identified as the most critical in the landslide. But you go and see, there is no landslide at all. Only the landslide has occurred other areas. That means that if we have the investment, we can arrest it, right? Similar way, if we were talking about the earthquake, so if you wanted to face the potential earthquake which may come to the city like Colombo, many old structures are there. We have to assess, and some of them are very old. Maybe we have to, if there is no historical value, we have to demolish. The other structures we have to evaluate and strength for the potential earthquake, and definitely future building must design considering the earthquake. So that is we know the game, we know the equation, but the big question comes is the funding is the matter. But once the disaster happened, like what happened recently, it is a huge. Therefore, we have to find out the funding, and we need to have the program starting from the critical structures like the hospital, police station, fire brigade, and schools and universities, and we have to start from the top priorities to the bottom, and we have to assess the structures and the building, bridges, and strength is for the future potential earthquake or any disaster. Over to you, Janaka.
Yeah, no, technically, yeah, it really highlights an important challenge. Knowing that the risks exist is very different from embedding that knowledge into national preparedness and regulation. And then, as you say, funding. It's not only the implementation. I think when you look at from the research and development perspective, there's not enough funding, right? That's being there. So let's go to round 3, where we talk about implementation reality, where resilience breaks down, right? So if I put in a context and say, even when risk is understood and a policy is in place, the implementation remains the most fragile link in there. So my core question to all of you is, why does implementation so often fail? And what actually works on the ground to build resilience, right? So with that, let me continue, Ranjith, with what you just mentioned. So at the implementation level, based on your experience with structural retrofitting and post-disaster reconstruction, what are the most common barriers to ensuring that the existing buildings and bridges are properly assessed and strengthened before the next event? Okay, we don't know what the next event, what's the next disaster. We have also emphasized the importance of building codes. What codes cannot prevent disasters, and how critical are they in reducing structural failure, and what typically goes wrong in code enforcement and compliance? So it's a long question, but combining many areas in there.
Yeah, it should be a long answer, but I'll make it short this way, because I think Professor Dilanthi and Professor Priyan agree with me. The proper planning, land use is the issue. I'll get it a very simple way to understand this one. There's there are a lot of damage to the University of Peradeniya. you may know that most of the building that flooded was not the building which was in the original plan. Almost all the buildings which were built recently. That means that with the increase the population, we go beyond the risk boundaries and build the building. Therefore, I think that will give the good example. We must go back to the proper planning, and it should be a long-term planning. But this similar situation happened many countries. I'm sorry, I'm getting the example again from Japan. They had a similar situation. So they planned properly, brought the villages into the semi-urban areas and make them the proper housing and so forth. So they are now safe. So likewise, we need to have the long-term proper planning to understanding the situation and the rebuild. Another one is that we had a flooding in 2016. So that means we thought that is one of the worst flooding that we had. But after 9 years, it happened again. That means there is a climate change. So the risk is more and more. Therefore, we have to prepare. Otherwise, as Dilanthi mentioned, always we try to patch up when the disaster happens. So therefore, proper land use planning is the most important thing in order to prevent the future disaster with the population that we have. Over to you, Janaka.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then plus, I think it also, I feel that often it's not the absence of code, but inconsistent enforcement and ad hoc deviations that creates that vulnerability. So, Dilanthi, how critical is community engagement to successful implementation, and how often is it treated as a procedural requirement rather than a core strategy? I think you have to pay £5 now because you forgot to.
Sorry, I think the disaster resilience and the community engagement, to me, it is not actually two things. It's just one thing. This is where a lot of governments, a lot of societies, and a lot of systems fail. There are sort of various policies, systems in place at the top level, but the cascading them down to the community level is either not there or not sufficient. So in disaster resilience, to me, community engagement is not just a bonus factor. It is the infrastructure upon which all other technical solutions rest. There's absolutely no doubt about it. No matter how technical what we prepare, what we do, what we use to detect disasters at the top level, it could well be AI and all the important technology, but at the end of the day, it actually rests with the communities. While, for example, an early warning app might provide the tools, community engagement actually provides the agency and the logic, in my view, that makes those tools work during a crisis. Without the community engagement, that agency and the logic won't be there. So that is actually very, very important. So in that sense, how critical is engagement to success? For example, I think we all as researchers, we have heard about the 90% rule, haven't we? The first response. The research consistently shows that in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, up to 90% of the survivors are rescued by their own neighbors before the official emergency services arrive. That has been the case in most of the countries, and that was indeed the case in Sri Lanka during the very recent disaster. Engagement builds on social cohesion, for example, trust and networks, that makes this organic response possible, and we have seen this in a massive scale in operation in Sri Lanka. And also the contextual accuracy relating to communities. Local residents actually possess the hyper-local data, such as which elderly neighbor has problems in terms of mobility, which street floods first, that satellite imagery and top-down models often miss. So and we talk about oral histories and the indigenous knowledge that the communities actually hold. That is extremely important from the point of view of contextual accuracy. The third point is actually the sustainability of infrastructure. Nature-based solutions such as mangrove restoration or community shelters require local ownership. If the community doesn't feel ownership, these assets often fail into despair or will be bypassed during an actual event. So that is why the communities need to be the owners of the systems at the local level. So this is actually what I want to emphasize from the point of view of criticality of engagement. And if we sort of very quickly move on to the procedural requirements versus the core strategy, despite its proven value, there is a systematic gap between the policy implementation of inclusive resilience and on the ground reality. Again and again, we have seen this, going back to 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, 2011 Japan earthquake and the tsunami, and then thereafter in Indonesia, and again very recently in Sri Lanka. What are these actually problems? To me, the tick box reality, which is actually the procedural. Too often, engagement is treated as a regulatory hurdle to secure funding or satisfy a legal mandate. We have seen actually these bad practices. For example, procedures such as passive consultation. Meetings are held where officials present a finished plan and get people to sort of asking for comments. We call that as passive consultation. And also it could well be one-way information, using social media or flyers merely to broadcast warning rather than establishing a feedback loop. And also invisibility of vulnerable groups. There are sort of certain groups that are invisible and we just do not capture their mindset. So in that sense, we really need to get our minds out from this tick box reality. Always the community engagement has to be, I emphasize this again, has to be a two-way process. It can't be just one-way traffic. It has to be a two-way process. So what can we do? As a core strategy, I actually sort of propose a transformative strategy where engagement is a core strategy, where it shifts from consulting to co-production. This is extremely important. It is not consultation, it has to be co-production. It needs to be based on community-led risk assessments, such as residence maps, their own vulnerabilities and assets, which they dictate where government's resources are allocated. And also we really need to have empowered leadership at the local level. Training local resilient champions, for example, or neighborhood brigades who have the authority to act independently if command structures fail. That is very, very important. This is very much linked to, Janaka, the second point that you identified from the point of view of governance, and we highlighted the governance gaps at the local level. So this empowering leadership has a very direct link to the governance gap. So this is actually what I see from the point of view of community engagement. This is actually, again, a non-negotiable requirement in disaster prevention and mitigation, and it is actually not consulting. It has to be co-production. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's great. Priyan, with the time that we have, I just want to sort of put a question, and then after that, I will give a round to each one of you for a very quick, rapid reflection on that. So, from an international perspective, right? I mean, what implementation practices have genuinely improved resilience outcomes, and what lessons can others learn?
Yeah, actually, this is a good question. I'll make it very brief here because of our timing. I'll maybe a couple of minutes. We need to think smarter ways now. So things have worked. I've had to use one word here rather than describing a lot. So no, again, this word safe to fail. So we can really be smarter. I'll give one example. I can give so many examples, but rather than fail to safe, be safe. So now the safe to fail means we don't need to really, we can't really, when we implement, we can't really make it everything, like as I mentioned the word earlier, fortresses and do all sort of things. So we need to really, doesn't matter, we can allow some areas to fail, and again, that approach, implementation approach, will save again the lot of money as well, because we don't have that. We can do these days. We can do anything. Implement. We can make it safe for one in, when we talk about numbers here, rather than 1 year, 1 in 100-year flood. We can design for 1 in 1,000-year. And earthquakes, we had this discussion around the world. Let's make it 1 in 2,500-year earthquake. So we can do all sort of things, but we need to balance with the cost and the practically implementing it. So we have been learning all that, and then making some important decisions. Again, I'm going back to the other point. We may have to allow certain places to fail, and we can't really, for example, even from this recent disaster, I'm actually involved in some of the housing solutions, but that we can't just build everywhere. We need to identify certain places and make sure they're built properly. We may have to, I will just, because we don't have time, I'll mention one thing. We may have to go, we can't have everyone having houses, individual houses, land. We don't have enough land here. So that's why we are suggesting some of this, coming from my experience, like precast type of solutions, but having a bit more, going a bit more low rise. So this sort of implementation, we need to be smarter. We can't just do what we have done in the past. We need to come up with some smarter ways of doing it. That's a brief answer.
Thank you, Priyan. I think overall, with the thoughts that you have been, it's also clear that resilience is kind of lost less through lack of intent and more through weak coordination, capacity, and continuity. So I saw a very interesting question from the Zoom user, but with the time, if you can actually see the question, but I want to give that last, we have 7 minutes left, kind of a rapid reflection in terms of that. I want to ask, 1 minute, maximum 1 minute, if you could change one thing tomorrow, if you have a magic wand in risk assessment, policy, or implementation that would measurably improve disaster resilience, what would it be, right? So let's start with Dilanthi. So again, 1 minute, if you have a magic wand, what would you do?
Okay, so it's just that seamless flow from national to local, from national government to the local communities, the seamless flow, and also the concentration on multi-hazards rather than having this mindset about dealing with individual hazards. It really does not work. We are in the 21st century and the risk is changing. There are systematic and there are cascading impacts. We really need to get out this mindset about individual hazards. Let's move on, considering the multi-hazard perspective and cascading down the policies from national to local.
Thank you. Good point on that. That's also a reflection to a question that's in the chat as well. Professor Mendis.
1 minute. Yeah, okay. So, in fact, this backward thinking approach, we have always used a compliance and all that. Rather than that, let's go for a forward thinking approach. So I mentioned this earlier also. Let's go to some performance based, do some thinking, and then more focus on what is the performance we require and focus on that. That's the one thing if you ask me. Yeah, sure.
We'll give it to the local champion now, Professor Dissanayake.
It's very important that we must go for the planning and assessment and rectification and the implementation of the building code. That is what I was talking about.
Okay. All right. So, today's discussion is very timely, and it also confirms that the disaster resilience is not achieved by better engineering, better models alone, right? It depends on many multiple of things: the leadership, the governance, the institutional alignments, funding, sustained commitment, right? So when you think about from a broader sense, so disaster resilience is not built during disaster. It is built long before, through decisions that value prevention over reaction, right? And systems that connect knowledge to action. So the real challenge is not knowing what we do, but it is choosing to act early and together, and also as Dilanthi said, the multi-hazard concept as well. So with that, I want to thank the panelists. and the participants, and also special thanks to GAP HQ for organizing this important webinar right after, within a month that we had if you remember, the last month at this time was pretty bad in Sri Lanka and then around the region as well. So thank you so much, and I would pass it on to Sanjeev to conclude.
Thank you very much, host. Thank you.
Thank you.